At 19, she was forced to marry a millionaire mafia boss. But his wedding gift silenced the town. The air at Briar Hill College smelled like freshly cut grass and laminated paper. Lena Marlowe, at 19, held a stack of orientation pamphlets to her chest. The bright blue logo of the university mascot, a beacon of a future she had fought for. She was just another face in a sea of hopeful freshmen. And for the first time in her life, she felt anonymous in the best possible way. She was listening to a junior explain the merits of the meal plan when a shadow fell over her. "Lena." The voice was gravel, soaked in stale beer and regret. She turned, the pamphlet slipping from her grasp. Carl Marlowe stood on the pristine college quad, his threadbare jacket a stain on the manicured landscape. He hadn't seen her in 6 months, not since he'd hawked her grandmother's ring for a losing streak at the track. "Dad? What are you doing here? I told you. Orientation is... We're leaving," he said. He wasn't looking at her, but at the stately brick buildings, as if they personally offended him. "Leaving? I just got here. My first class isn't for a week, but I have the ice cream social tonight." It sounded so stupid when she said it out loud, but her voice was trembling. He finally looked at her, and the emptiness in his eyes snuffed out the sunlight. "There is no ice cream social. Not for you. Get your bag from the dorm. We're going. I'm not going anywhere with you." "Yes, you are." His hand clamped around her upper arm, his fingers digging in with a strength that was pure desperation. "You're going to get in the car, and you're going to listen. For once in your life. You're going to be a daughter." The small duffel bag felt heavy as she tossed it in the rusted back seat of his sedan. The ride was silent, the tension a humming wire between them. He didn't drive back to the run-down side of Briar Hill. He drove toward the city, the skyline looming. He finally pulled into the cracked parking lot of a desolate diner, the neon sign flickering a sickly pink. Inside, the coffee was burnt, and the vinyl on the booth was cracked. Carl couldn't meet her eyes. He just stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking a frantic rhythm against the ceramic. "I'm in trouble. Lena." "What else is new?" she said, the bitterness coating her tongue. "This is different. This isn't a few grand. This is real." He took a shaky breath. "I owe money. A lot of money to the wrong people." Lena felt her stomach clench. "How much?" $3 million. The number hung in the air, so vast it was meaningless. It was a movie number. It wasn't real. "So you declare bankruptcy. You go to jail. I don't care. What does this have to do with me?" "They don't want the money. Lena, they know I can't get it." Carl finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot and pleading. "They want to make a deal, to settle the debt." "What deal?" she whispered, though she already felt the cold dread creeping up her spine. You're the deal. I don't understand. You're being married off," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "To Dante Varelli." Lena just stared. The name meant nothing and everything. She'd heard it in whispers, a boogeyman for the city, the Varelli family. They didn't just own businesses, they owned politicians, police, and half the coastline. And Dante Varelli was the head of it all. A man, they said, who had inherited his father's empire at 17 and painted it red. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. "That's not funny. That's insane. You can't be serious. You can't sell your daughter. That's not possible." "It's done," he hissed, slamming his hand on the table. The coffee cups jumped. "The deal is done. It's this, or we're all dead. Your mother, your little brother. You... dead." "No," Lena cried, the tears a hot, sudden sting. She was shaking her head, the motion violent. "No, I won't. I'll go to the police." Carl laughed, a broken, terrifying sound. "The police? Girl, he is the police. He's everything. You think you have a choice? You think I have a choice? I'm trying to save our lives." "My life!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You're ending my life. I'm 19. I'm supposed to be at college. I am not marrying a killer, an old man." "He's 34. And he's not just a killer, he's a millionaire. So you better watch your mouth," Carl snapped, his fear replaced by a pathetic flicker of defensiveness. "You'll do this, and you'll be grateful. You'll have everything. I have everything I want," she wept. the tears now streaming down her face, hot and useless. I had a scholarship. I had a roommate. I was happy. Happy doesn't keep you alive. He grabbed her wrist, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You will go. You will put on the dress. You will smile. And you will not make him angry. If you run, he will find you. And he will kill me first. And he'll make you watch. Do you understand me? Your family. Our lives. It's all on you now. The engagement dinner was that same night. It was not a dinner. It was a signing over. It was held in a private room at a restaurant so exclusive. There was no name on the door. The table was mahogany. So long she couldn't see the other end. There were 4 men in dark suits, including her father, who looked small and pathetic. And then there was him. Dante Varelli. He was not what she expected. He was not old. At 34, he wore his power like a perfectly tailored suit. There was no fat on him. Just a coiled, quiet energy. His hair was black, his jaw was sharp, and his eyes were the darkest of an accountant's ledger. They were cold, assessing, and utterly unreadable. He did not speak much. He nodded to her father, who was sweating and fawning. He listened as his lawyers spoke in low, clipped tones about the merging of assets and the prenuptial agreement. Lena sat there, a ghost in a borrowed dress, her fork frozen over a plate of food that cost more than her car. Dante Varelli didn't look at her father. He didn't look at the lawyers. His dark eyes lingered on Lena. He watched her when she stared at her plate. He watched her when she twisted the cheap ring on her finger. He watched her when a tear escaped and she angrily wiped it away. He wasn't leering. He wasn't even sympathetic. He was just observing. He was studying her, like a new, valuable, and potentially dangerous acquisition. The next day, she signed the marriage license. Her hands shook so violently that the lawyer had to guide her pen. The signature was a jagged, childish scrawl. Lena Marlowe. Gone. They put her in a white dress. It was not a wedding gown. It was a simple, sleeveless sheath of heavy, expensive silk. It felt cold against her skin. It was not her own. It was a uniform. The ceremony was private, held in a cavernous, empty cathedral that Dante owned. The only witnesses were her father, who looked relieved, and a man with a scar on his cheek who Lena assumed was Dante's second-in-command. She walked down the aisle alone. There was no music. The only sound was the click of her borrowed heels on the marble floor. When she reached the altar, Dante turned to her. In the stark daylight, she could see the fine lines around his eyes. He had been powerful for a long time. She tried to maintain eye contact. She tried to show him she was not just something he had bought. She tried to hold his gaze, to silently scream her hatred, her fear, her defiance. She held it for 10 seconds, then 20. But when the priest, who looked terrified, pronounced them man and wife, Dante stepped forward and lifted the small, useless veil from her face. His hand was warm as it brushed her cheek. She flinched. Her whole body recoiled, a small, involuntary spasm of pure terror. His eyes softened, just a fraction, but it was there. He leaned in, and his lips brushed hers. It was not a kiss of passion, or even of possession. It was a seal, a brand, a fact. He pulled back, his face so close that she could feel the warmth of his breath. He whispered, so low that only she could hear, "I won't hurt you." It did not sound like a promise. It sounded like a fact. That night, she was escorted to the master bedroom of his mansion. It was not a mansion, it was a fortress, a glass and steel compound perched on the cliffs overlooking the ocean. The bedroom was larger than her entire family's apartment. The bed was a monument. She sat on the edge of it, still in the white dress, her hands clenched in her lap, waiting for the end. She was his. He had paid for her. He would take her. He came in an hour later. He had showered. His hair was damp, and he wore a simple black t-shirt and gray sweatpants. He looked, for a moment, just like a man. He stopped at the foot of the bed, observing her as she trembled. "You can have the bed," he said, his voice a low rumble. She looked up, confused. "It's your room. Sleep." He gestured to the sprawling mattress. "I'll take the couch." He turned and walked to the large, plush sofa by the unlit fireplace, picked up a blanket, and lay down, his back to her. Lena sat there for a long time, listening to the sound of his steady breathing. She was confused. She'd prepared for a monster, for violence, for pain. She'd not prepared for this civility. It was more disorienting than cruelty. She eventually crawled under the covers, still in the dress, and cried herself into a raw, exhausted sleep. She woke in the dark to the sound of his voice. It was not the calm, measured voice from the bedroom. This was the voice of the man who commanded the city. "I don't care what you heard," Dante was saying, his voice a lethal whisper on the phone. "I don't care who he is. You find him. You remind him of the rules." A pause. "No, you don't touch him. You bring him to me." Lena sat up, clutching the sheets to her chest. "He went near my wife," Dante continued, and the word wife sent a jolt of ice through her. "He looked at her. He spoke to her father's associates. That is a mistake, and mistakes get corrected." Another pause. "Make sure she is safe. Make sure she is never, ever approached again. If a breeze blows the wrong way on her, I will hold you personally responsible. Do you understand?" He hung up. The silence in the room was absolute. Lena lay back down, her heart pounding. He was talking about her. Someone had what? Asked about her, and now Dante was going to correct them. He was her captor. He was in the cage, but she realized, with a sickening, terrifying clarity, that he was also her protector. He was already protecting her, even as she despised him for the situation she was in. A few days later, there was a formal family reception, a parade. Lena was to be presented as Mrs. Varelli. Dante's second-in-command, the man with the scar, introduced himself as Marco DeSantis. He was polite, but his eyes were as cold as his boss's. He and a team of security guards drove her to a tailor, to a hairdresser. They dressed her like a doll, this time in a deep emerald green dress that clung to her. The reception was at a sprawling country club. The air was thick with perfume, cigar smoke, and the sound of false laughter. Dante stood at her side, his hand resting lightly, possessively, on the small of her back. His touch was a brand, a clear do-not-touch sign for the rest of the world. She was introduced to cousins, uncles, business associates. They all smiled at her, their eyes sharp, assessing. They were sizing her up, and she could hear the whispers when she passed. 19, just a baby. Carl Marlowe's girl, heard he gambled her away. She's lucky. Imagine, waking up to that kind of money. She hit the lottery. She won't last 6 months. He gets bored. Lucky. The word echoed in her head. They thought she was lucky. She felt bile rise in her throat. She was a prize, a trophy, a debt paid. She murmured, "Excuse me," to Dante. He didn't stop her, but his eyes followed her as she fled. She locked herself in a cavernous marble bathroom, the sound of the party muted by the heavy door. She leaned over the sink, staring at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was a stranger. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was flawless. Her eyes were dead. The carefully constructed dam of the last 72 hours finally broke. A sob tore from her throat, a raw, animal sound. She sank to the floor, her back against the cold stall, and wept. She cried for her lost future, for her stolen choices, for the girl on the college quad. She cried for her own weakness, for her father's betrayal, and for the terrifying, suffocating kindness of the man who now owned her. She was having a complete breakdown, her body shaking with the force of her grief. She didn't hear the door open. She only knew she wasn't alone when a shadow fell over her. She looked up, her vision blurred. Dante. He was just standing there, watching her. Her breath hitched, her sobs catching in her throat, turning to gasps of panic. He was going to be angry. She was embarrassing him. She was being ungrateful. He didn't speak. He locked the bathroom door, shutting out the rest of the world. Then he crouched down, his expensive suit jacket pooling on the dirty marble floor. He didn't touch her. He just waited. I'm sorry, she choked out. I needed a... He held out his hand. It was not a command. It was an offer. Hesitantly, she took it. His hand was large, warm, and calloused. He gently pulled her to her feet. She was unsteady, a mess of running mascara and snot, and then he did the last thing she expected. He pulled her against his chest. He didn't pat her back. He didn't shush her. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just held her. He stood, solid as a stone wall, and let her fall apart. He held her as she cried into his $1,000 shirt, his hand coming up to rest on the back of her head, holding her steady as the tremors racked her body. She was clinging to the very man who was in her prison, and he was the only thing holding her up. After minutes that felt like hours, her sobs subsided into shaky breaths. She was exhausted. She pulled back, embarrassed, wiping her face. "I've ruined your shirt." He didn't look at it. He was looking at her. His gaze was intense, but it wasn't cold. It was something else. He gently, almost shyly, reached up with his thumb and wiped a stray tear from under her eye. His touch was rough, but surprisingly tender. Then he tucked a loose, damp strand of her hair behind her ear. The small, intimate gesture sent a strange shiver through her. "You don't owe me anything," he said, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear him. "Not for the dress, not for the money, not for your father." She stared at him, confused. "You owe me," he continued, his dark eyes holding hers. "Nothing." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Except your honesty. Never lie to me, Lena. I don't care if you hate me. I don't care if you're afraid. But you will be honest. That's the deal." He held her gaze for a moment longer, then unlocked the door. The sound of the party, the laughter, the music, flooded back in. He stepped out first, a shield, his body clearing a path for her, leaving her to fix her face. Alone. But somehow, terrifyingly, no longer completely on her own. The mansion was a masterpiece of glass and cold, white marble perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. It was a beautiful prison, and Lena Marlowe was its only solitary inmate. In the first week, Lena learned the rules. She was Mrs. Varelli and Mrs. Varelli wanted for nothing. Dante had given her a black, limitless credit card. A team of stylists had filled a walk-in closet the size of her father's apartment with clothes that felt like costumes. A silver convertible, a car she would never be allowed to drive, sat gleaming in the garage. But the luxury was a cage. She was never alone. If she went to the library to read, a guard in a dark suit would stand in the hallway. If she tried to walk the grounds, another would follow at a distance of 20 paces. They were polite, silent, and ever-present. They were not for her protection. They were to protect his investment. Dante was a ghost. He left before she woke. His side of the room, the couch, already tidy, the blanket folded. He returned late, long after she had pretended to be asleep, her body rigid in the massive bed. He still slept on that couch, a silent, powerful lump in the darkness. They were married, but they were strangers orbiting each other in the silent, cavernous house. The suffocation became a physical weight. The smell of the ocean, so close, mocked her. It was freedom, and she was trapped. On the 10th morning, she made a decision. It was impulsive, born of a desperate need to breathe air that was not owned by him. She woke early, dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, her old clothes, not the new silk. She slipped out of the master bedroom, padded down the spiral staircase, and walked through the silent kitchen. She didn't run. She just walked out the service door, past the sculpted hedges, and down the long, winding driveway toward the main gate. The air was sharp, salty, and real. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She was doing it. She was just leaving. She rounded the final bend. The massive, wrought iron gates were closed, but as she approached, a black sedan she didn't recognize pulled up from the outside, blocking the exit. The gate began to slide open, not for her, but for the car. A man got out of the driver's seat. It was Marco DeSantis, his scarred cheek impassive. He looked at her, not with anger, but with a kind of weary patience. "Mrs. Varelli," he said, his voice calm. "You're not dressed for the weather. It's cold." "I'm leaving," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "No, you're not," he replied, just as calmly. "You can't stop me." Marco sighed, a small, tired sound. He leaned against the car. We can? We will. But you're missing the point. You think you're his prisoner. You're not. You're his anchor. I don't know what that means. It means, Marco said, stepping toward her, that he has enemies, rivals, people who waited for his father to die, who are now waiting for him to make a mistake. You, Mrs. Varelli, are his first, very public, very soft mistake. So let me go, she pleaded. I'll disappear. I won't tell anyone anything. You still don't get it. He was closer now, his voice low. If you disappear, he looks weak. He looks like a man who can't control his own house, a man who can't control his wife. He let the word hang in the air. You'll get him killed if you keep running. You run. You paint a target on his back, then on yours. You want to go for a drive? I'll take you. But you are not leaving. She stared at him, the cold, awful logic sinking in. She wasn't just in a cage. She was the cage, and her escape would destroy the man who built it. She expected a confrontation. She expected Dante to be furious, to finally show the monster she knew was lurking beneath the quiet control. She waited in the den, her arms wrapped around herself, as the sun set. He found her there, but he didn't yell. He didn't pace. He just stood in the doorway, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened. Marco said you wanted to go out. He said. She stared at him, baffled. I tried to leave. Dante, I know. He walked to the bar, poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a glass, and looked at her. Next time, take me with you. What? If you want to leave the house, if you want to go for a drive, or whatever it is you do, you tell me, and I'll take you. He took a small sip. I don't want you running. It's dangerous. His patience was a weapon. It was more effective than any threat. It baffled her, and it chipped away at the pure, simple hatred she had been nursing. She was left with a confusing, murky mess of resentment and curiosity. She stopped hiding in her room. She started eating dinner at the table, even if he wasn't there. And when he was, she started to talk. It began with small things. Did you have a good day? A question he seemed unused to. It was a day, he'd reply, his voice a low rumble. One night, emboldened by his continued, placid presence on the couch, she asked more. Where did you grow up? He looked at her from the sofa, a shadow in the moonlight filtering through the windows. Here, this city, this house. Have you ever lived anywhere else? No? What about your father? She asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. He was silent for a long moment. My father was not a good man. He built this. He gestured to the house. On bad foundations. And your mother? She left. She was smart. He turned his back to her, a clear signal. But after a minute, he spoke again, his voice muffled by the cushions. I buried him when I was 17. The foundations are mine now. The words chilled her, but they were the first true thing he'd ever said to her. He wasn't just a monster. He was a boy who had survived a monster. The real thaw came on a Tuesday. It was raining, a violent, howling storm that turned the ocean into a gray, angry mess. The staff, fearing the roads, had been sent home early. Lena was in the kitchen, making toast for dinner. When Dante walked in, he looked exhausted. His hair was plastered to his head, and his suit was damp. He looked at her, at the toaster, and then at the empty, silent house. The chef is gone, she said, stating the obvious. I can see that. He stripped off his jacket, tossing it on a chair. He rolled up his white shirt sleeves, revealing muscular, tanned forearms. Do you know how to cook, or just make toast? I know how to cook, she said, bristling. Good. He went to the massive, stainless steel refrigerator. We're having pasta. They cooked in silence, an awkward, clumsy dance in the oversized kitchen. He chopped onions with a terrifying, precise speed. She stirred the sauce. It felt strange, almost domestic. It was the most time they had ever spent together. They ate at the kitchen island, the rain lashing against the windows. The silence was thick, broken only by the sound of forks against ceramic. She was nervous, eating too fast, and a small fleck of tomato sauce landed on the corner of her mouth. She didn't notice it. He did. He watched her for a moment, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. "You missed a spot," he said. Before she could grab a napkin, he reached across the small distance, his thumb, warm and slightly rough, brushed against the corner of her lips, wiping the sauce away. She froze. Her breath hitched. His eyes met hers, and his hand lingered for a heart-stopping second. It was so intimate, so normal. A small, nervous giggle escaped her. She couldn't help it. He looked startled, and then the strangest thing happened. The corners of his mouth twitched. He smiled. It wasn't the cold, assessing look he gave the world. It was a real, small, unguarded smile, and then a sound she had never heard. He chuckled. It was a low, rusty sound, as if the mechanism was unused. She found herself laughing, a real, genuine laugh of pure, absurd relief, and he laughed with her. For 10 seconds, in the middle of a storm, in a kitchen that was not her own. They were just two people, laughing. Later, they moved to the den. The television was on. Some old black and white movie. The sound of the rain was a comfort. She was on one end of the sofa. He was on the other. As the movie droned on, her eyelids grew heavy. She was tired from the tension, from the strangeness of the day. Her head felt heavy, without thinking, almost unconsciously. She let her head tip to the side, coming to rest on his shoulder. He stiffened. His entire body became rigid. She jerked up. "I'm sorry, It's fine," he said, his voice gruff. It's fine." She hesitated, then slowly let her head rest on his shoulder again. This time, he didn't stiffen. After a minute, he visibly relaxed. They sat that way for an hour, in the dark, the storm raging outside, a strange, unspoken truce settling between them. That night, she dreamed. She dreamed he was kissing her. Not the cold, dry press of their wedding day, but a real kiss. A kiss of slow, deep, undeniable want. She dreamed his hands were in her hair, and his lips were... She woke up, her heart pounding, her lips tingling. The room was cold. A sharp whistling sound cut through the pre-dawn dark. She sat up. The large window overlooking the cliff, the one by her side of the bed, was rattling. The wind from the storm had broken a latch and a draft was streaming in. Then she saw him. He was already there, at the window. He must have heard it from the couch. He was wearing only his sweatpants, and his back was to her. As he worked on the latch, his arms flexed. His back was a landscape. Broad shoulders, a narrow waist, and a map of faint, silvery white scars. They looked old. She sat there, mesmerized, the dream still clinging to her. He was solid, powerful, and real. He must have sensed her eyes on him because he turned. He was shirtless, and she was confronted with the full reality of him, a defined, muscular chest, a flat stomach. He was not a boy. He was a man, built by work and violence. "Go back to sleep," he said, his voice rough. "The latch is loose. The wind..." "Why me?" The question burst out of her, raw and unfiltered, a product of the dream and the cold. He stopped fiddling with the window. "What? Why me?" she repeated, clutching the sheets to her chest. "You could have had anyone. You're you. You're rich. You could have had any woman in this city, someone who actually wanted this. Why my father's debt? Why me? Why force me?" He looked at her for a long time, the wind whistling between them. "You're smart," he said finally. "You know how this works. It was a deal." "No, that's not an answer. That's what you did. I'm asking why." He turned from the window and walked toward the bed. He stopped at the foot of it, his expression unreadable in the dark. "Because," he said, his voice low and intense. "I needed someone who didn't already want something from me." She stared, confused. "Everyone else in this city," he explained. "They see the name, they see the money, they see the power. They'd smile while they figured out a way to poison me. They'd want things. They'd lie. They'd pretend." He took a step closer. You hate me. You're terrified of me. And you don't hide it. You're honest." He nodded, as if confirming it to himself. I needed someone honest, even if it was honest hate. An incident occurred a week later. Dante, in a strange gesture of something, told her she could go to a bookstore in the city. "Marco will take you," he'd said. She was in the history aisle, her fingers tracing the spines of books, feeling almost normal for the first time in weeks, when a man cornered her. He was in his late 20s, smelled of expensive cologne and whiskey, and had an arrogant, cruel mouth. Well, he slurred, blocking her path. "The Varelli baby. I've seen your picture. Bought and paid for, right?" "Excuse me," Lena said, trying to push past him. Marco was at the end of the aisle, watching. The man grabbed her arm, hard. "Come on. How much for a test drive? I bet you're a lot cheaper than $3 million. Lena froze. Marco was moving, his hand going to his jacket, but he wasn't fast enough. A shadow moved faster. Dante. He had appeared out of nowhere. He wasn't supposed to be there. He didn't speak. He didn't yell. He grabbed the man's wrist, the one holding Lena's arm. There was a sickening, wet snap. The man screamed. Dante didn't hit his face. He moved with a brutal, terrifying grace. He drove his fist into the man's stomach. Once, then his ribs, twice. The man folded, gasping, all the arrogance gone. Dante leaned in, his lips at the man's ear, and whispered something so low Lena couldn't hear. But the man's face turned white with terror. Dante stood up, straightened his cuffs, and looked at the man gasping on the floor. His own knuckles were split and bleeding. Lena was shaking, her hand pressed to her mouth. She was horrified by the speed, the efficiency, the silence of the violence. But deep beneath the horror, a new, dark and confusing emotion bloomed. She felt protected. He had defended her. That night. The silence in the mansion was heavy. He was in the kitchen, running cold water over his bruised, bleeding hand. He had said nothing on the drive home. Lena watched him from the doorway. He was wincing. The water clearly stinging. She didn't think so. She just acted, She went to the main bathroom and grabbed the first aid kit. She returned to the kitchen, pushed his hand away from the faucet, and said, "Sit." He looked at her, surprised, but he sat. Her hands were shaking. She poured antiseptic on a cotton ball, her touch gentle as she cleaned the broken skin and raw knuckles. He didn't flinch, but he watched her. He wasn't watching her hands. He was watching her face. The only sound was the buzz of the refrigerator and the crinkle of the gauze. The smell of antiseptic and his skin filled the air. It was more intimate than the laughter, more real than the dream. She finished wrapping his hand, her fingers lingering on the white gauze. Her hand was still resting on his. She looked up. He was already looking at her, his dark eyes intense, not cold. He leaned in, slowly. It was a question, not a demand. He was giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His lips touched hers. It was slow. It was soft. I was hesitant. It was nothing like the cold brand of their wedding day. It was nothing like the passionate, hungry kiss of her dream. It was something in between. It was a kiss loaded with restraint, with unspoken questions, with fear, and with a deep, shared loneliness. His free hand came up, not to grab her, but to cup her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. The kiss ended, but they didn't pull apart. They stayed there, foreheads almost touching, breathing the same air. The battle was over, and a new, far more dangerous war had just begun. The kiss in the kitchen changed the air. It was no longer the heavy, suffocating silence of a prison. It was the charged, electric silence of a storm waiting to break. That night, Dante did not go to the couch. He entered the master bedroom, and Lena, who'd been sitting on the edge of the bed reading a book, felt her heart leap into her throat. He said nothing. He just went to the large armoire, retrieved a pillow and a blanket, and returned to the bed. He did not get under the covers. He lay on top of the silk duvet, a solid, warm presence 6 inches from her, separated by a valley of mattress. It was a truce, not a surrender. They lay in the dark, 2 solitary islands, acutely aware of the tide rising between them. The next morning, the bubble burst. "You're coming with me," he said. And it was not a question. He was introducing her to his world, but only in glimpses, like flashes of lightning. He kept her at a distance from the true violence, but she was no longer shielded from its shadow. She sat in the silver convertible while he went into a shipping office by the docks, a dusty, nondescript building that had no business being guarded by two men with bulges under their suit jackets. She heard no gunshots, no screams, but when he returned, his jaw was set, and the air around him was cold. Another day. She sat in a booth at the back of a dark Italian restaurant, a place where the waiters were too respectful and everyone knew his name. He held a meeting in the private room. She could hear the low rumble of voices, an argument, then a single, sharp crack, like a board breaking. It was followed by absolute silence. When he emerged, he was adjusting his cuffs, his face impassive. He placed a hand on the small of her back and said, "Let's get you some lunch." He was showing her the perimeter of his life, the money laundering fronts, the late-night meetings, the private bodyguards who were not just guards but soldiers. He was showing her the walls of his fortress, and she was beginning to understand that he had built them not to keep the world out, but to keep the chaos in. The illusion of peace shattered on a bright Wednesday morning. Lena had taken to walking the grounds, her silent guard always 20 paces behind. She felt a small, rebellious thrill in the simple act of breathing the salt air, a small piece of normalcy. She was walking down the long, paved driveway to retrieve the mail when she saw it. It was in the center of the drive, placed with grotesque intention. It was a large animal, something wild, but it was wrong. She took a step closer, her mind unable to process the dark, coppery smell. Then she saw the head, placed a few feet away from the body, its glassy eyes staring at the sky. Lena screamed. It was not a small cry of fright. It was a raw, visceral tear in the fabric of the morning, a sound of pure horror. She stumbled back, her hands flying to her mouth, the taste of bile rising in her throat. The guard was running, speaking into his wrist, his gun drawn. Within seconds, Dante burst from the front door, Marco at his heels. He saw Lena, saw her white, stricken face, and then he saw the thing on the driveway. His face, which she had seen soften into a smile, which she had seen tight with restrained passion, went utterly blank. It was the most terrifying expression she had ever seen. "Marco," he said, his voice lethally soft. "Get her inside, now." He moved toward the animal, but Marco, already at Lena's side, was faster. He grabbed her, his hand firm on her arm. "Inside. Mrs. Varelli. Let's go." Dante was already on the phone, his back to her, barking orders. "Morelli's, it has to be. I want a perimeter. I want eyes on every one of their associates. Find out who did this. Find out who got on my property." Marco ushered her into the den and poured her a glass of water, but her hands were shaking too badly to hold it. The horror was replaced by a deep, bone-chilling cold. This was not a warning. It was a message, delivered to her. Dante found her an hour later. She was still on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the unlit fireplace. "It's gone," he said. "It's been handled." She looked up at him, her eyes hollow. "Who are the Morellis?" He paced, his energy too large and too violent for the room. "A rival family. Old-world fools who think a knife in the dark is how you conduct business." He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "This is why," he bit out, slamming his palm on the desk. This is why I never wanted to bring a woman into my life. I didn't ask for this," she whispered, the tears starting to well. "I know," he said, his voice rough. He turned to her, and the anger was gone, replaced by a weary, bleak exhaustion. "They don't see you. Lena, they don't care about you. They see a tool. You're a weakness they'll try to use. You're a soft spot they can press to see if I'll bleed." He knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands in his. "I can't protect you if I'm worried about you. I can't think clearly." She looked at him, really looked at him. The man the city feared. The millionaire mafia boss was kneeling on his expensive rug, and he looked lost. A new, strange feeling bloomed in her chest, pushing past the horror. It was empathy. "They're afraid of you," she said, her voice quiet but gaining strength. He gave a short, bitter laugh. They have a funny way of showing it. No, she insisted, tightening her grip on his hands. That thing outside. That wasn't power. That was desperation. It was a tantrum. They did that because they're terrified. They hate you, Dante. Not because you're evil, but because they can't control you. Because you're impossible to control. He stared at her, his dark eyes searching her face. The realization settled between them, heavy and true. She was no longer just a victim of his world. She was becoming a part of it. The tension in the house was unbearable for the next 2 days. The number of guards doubled. The mansion felt like a tomb. Dante was on the phone constantly, his voice a low, angry buzz. On the 3rd day, he snapped his phone shut. "Pack a bag," he said. "What? Where are we going?" "Away, just for a few days. I have a place, somewhere they can't find us, somewhere quiet." The place was a cabin, high in the mountains, a 2-hour drive from the city. It was not a rustic shack. It was a modern, elegant retreat of wood and glass, built into the side of a cliff, completely isolated. There were no guards. There was no staff. It was just him and her and the whispering pines. The first night, they built a fire. The silence was different here. It was not the charged silence of the mansion, but a deep, clean, cold silence that was almost absolute. They ate a simple meal of bread and cheese and wine. Sitting on the floor in front of the massive stone fireplace, they talked. Not about the Morellis, not about the debt. He told her about the trees, how he'd come here as a boy, not with his father, but alone, to escape. She told him about her favorite books, about the classes she had wanted to take. He was watching her, the firelight dancing in his eyes. The tension was back, but it was not fear. It was the same electric hum from the kitchen, magnified by the isolation, by the crackling logs, by the undeniable fact that they were completely, utterly alone. She stood up. He watched her, his body tensing, as if expecting her to retreat to the bedroom. Instead, she stood in the golden firelight, her heart pounding a heavy, slow rhythm against her ribs. She was tired of being afraid of her father, of the Morellis, of him, but most of all, afraid of this strange, terrifying feeling in her own chest. "I'm not afraid of you," she whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost lost to the fire. He didn't move. "Lena." His voice was a warning, a plea. "They are," she said, taking a step toward him. "Rosa when I meet her. I know she won't be, but they are. The Morellis are. The whole city is." She stopped, just out of his reach. "But I'm not, to prove it, more to herself than to him." She reached for the buttons of the flannel shirt she wore. Her fingers were clumsy, shaking but steady. "Don't," he said, his voice strained. He hadn't moved. "I'm not," she repeated. The shirt parted, revealing the simple cotton camisole she wore beneath. She didn't stop. She pushed the shirt from her shoulders, letting it fall to the floor. The firelight was warm on her skin. She was vulnerable, but for the first time, she felt powerful. He stood then, in one fluid, silent motion. He crossed the few feet between them, his size and his heat enveloping her. He didn't view was blocked. His hands, calloused and warm, came up to rest on her bare shoulders. His touch was electric, a jolt that went straight through her. She gasped. "You're shaken," he murmured. His gaze locked on hers. "So are you," she breathed. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not the hesitant, questioning kiss of the kitchen. It was a kiss of deep, mutual, and desperate need. It was the kiss of two people who had been lonely their entire lives. A kiss that tasted of wine and wood smoke, and a loneliness so profound it ached. His hands moved from her shoulders, one sliding down her back to pull her flush against him, the other burying itself in her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. It was not rough, but it was hungry. It was a claim. She responded with an equal, surprising hunger, her hands clinging to his shirt, pulling him closer. This was her choice. This was not a debt, not a deal. This was a decision. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. "Lena," he whispered. His eyes closed. It was the first time he had said her name like a prayer. He lifted her then, as if she weighed nothing, and carried her to the bedroom. He didn't toss her onto the bed. He laid her down gently, reverently, on the cool, soft sheets. Their first intimate night was a slow, tender discovery. It was unfolding. He undressed her with a care she never thought him capable of, his rough fingers tracing the line of her collarbone, the curve of her waist, as if he were memorizing her. He'd never touched anyone so carefully. And when she touched him, when she ran her hands over the hard, defined planes of his chest, over the silvery scars on his back, she felt him shudder. It was not a shudder of passion, but of liberation. It was slow. It was emotional. It was filled with the quiet, desperate sounds of two people letting go of a loneliness they had carried for too long. In the isolation of the mountains, surrounded by nothing but the silent trees, they found a mutual shelter, a place where the war outside could not touch them, if only for a few hours. They returned to the city 2 days later. The air in the car was different. They sat closer. He held her hand on the console, his thumb rubbing small circles on her skin. The guards were still at the gate. The tension was still in the air, but they were a unit. The rumors started a week later. It was subtle at first, a look from the housekeeper, a knowing smile from Marco, Lena. In a rare outing to a charity luncheon, Dante insisted she attend. Overheard it? "She's glowing," one woman whispered to another, behind a manicured hand. "Must be pregnant." "Well, it's about time he secured an heir," the other replied, sipping her champagne. The rumor hit Lena like a physical blow. Pregnant. The thought was so foreign, so impossible. She wasn't, but the idea, once planted, caused a strange, unexpected tension. She told Dante that night, expecting him to laugh it off, to be angry at the gossip. He just went very still. He was sitting at his desk, and he stopped shuffling papers. "Are you?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "No," she said, shocked. "Of course not. It's just a stupid rumor." He didn't look relieved. He looked something else. He looked at the floor, a muscle in his jaw tightening. "Right. Stupid?" He didn't want to talk about it, but Lena saw it then. Dante Varelli, the man who had everything, longed for a family. He longed for a normal, real life that his name and his violence made impossible. And the false rumor, the reminder of what he could not have, was more painful than any threat. 2 days later, he took her somewhere new. It wasn't a front, it wasn't a restaurant, it was a hospice, a quiet, sun-filled place that smelled of polish and lilies. "I need you to meet someone," he said, and his hand, holding hers, was clammy. He was nervous. In a private room, a woman was propped up in bed, surrounded by photographs. She was thin, her skin pale and translucent, but her eyes were a sharp, brilliant black. They were Dante's eyes. "Rosa," Dante said, his voice softer than Lena had ever heard it. "This is Lena." Rosa Varelli, his terminally ill older sister, smiled, and the room seemed to light up. "So," she said, her voice weak but full of spirit, "you're the one. You're the girl who finally made my brother human." Rosa instantly adored Lena. She waved Dante away. "Go get me some water, Dante. Stop hovering. I want to talk to her." Dante, for the first time, looked awkward. He obeyed, leaving them alone. "He's a fool, you know," Rosa said, taking Lena's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "A good man, but a fool, buried in guilt and duty." "He's been good to me," Lena said. "Good? He's obsessed with you." Rosa laughed, a dry, papery sound. "I've never seen him settle. You're good for him, but you need to be careful." "The Morellis? Them? No, my brother." Rosa's smile faded. "He'll protect you. He'll build a fortress around you. He'll die for you, but he'll never ask you to stay. He thinks he's poisoned. He thinks he'll destroy everything he touches." Dante returned, and Lena was quiet, Rosa's words echoing in her head. As they were leaving, Rosa held on to Lena's hand. "Listen to me," she whispered, her eyes intense. "He won't make the choice. You'll have to decide that yourself. If this life, if he, is worth the war." The warning hung in the air, heavy and prophetic. Lena felt a new resolve. She wasn't just a captive. She wasn't just a wife. She was, perhaps, the only person who could save him from himself. That night, she was getting ready for bed, the weight of Rosa's words still on her. She reached into her purse, the one she had taken to the hospice, to find her hairbrush. Her fingers brushed against a piece of paper that wasn't hers. It was a small, stiff card. She pulled it out. It was heavy, expensive cardstock. There was one sentence, written in glistening, thick, blood-red ink. "We know what you are to him. You won't survive the war." She dropped the card as if it had burned her. A small, choked sound escaped her throat. Dante was in the bathroom, and he was out in a second, a towel around his waist. What is it?" She couldn't speak. She just pointed, her finger trembling, at the card on the floor. Dante saw it. The man who had visited his dying sister. The man who had laughed in the kitchen. The man who had held her so tenderly in the mountains. Vanished. In his place was the boss. His face went cold, his eyes flat and hard with a rage so profound it sucked the air from the room. He didn't touch the card. He just stared at it. "Marco!" he roared, a sound that seemed to shake the walls. "Get in here!" He turned to Lena, his face a mask of controlled fury. He didn't yell at her. He just grabbed her robe, wrapped it around her, and pulled her into his arms. "Security!" he snapped to Marco, who had appeared at the door. "Double it. She doesn't leave this house. She doesn't leave this room without me. Do you understand?" That night, the pretense was finally, completely over. He didn't just sleep on top of the covers. He pulled back the sheet, got into the bed, and wrapped his body around hers, pulling her back against his chest. His arm was a heavy, warm bar across her waist, his breathing a hot puff against her neck. They were closer than they had ever been. But as Lena lay there, rigid in his protective embrace, she knew, with terrifying certainty, that the fear was in the bed with them. It was lurking right behind every soft, desperate kiss. The war had come to their door. The note, written in what Lena could only assume was blood, had turned the mansion into a high-security prison. Dante had been true to his word. She did not leave her room without him. The house, which had once felt cavernous and empty, was now claustrophobic, humming with the footsteps of new, grim-faced guards. They patrolled the halls, the grounds, and even stood post outside their bedroom door. They slept, entangled, his body a shield, his arm a heavy bar across her waist. But the man who held her was a stranger. The explosion came just after 2 a.m. It was not a crack like a gunshot. It was a deep, resonant whoomph that shook the foundation of the house. The blast wave shattered the wall of glass windows in their bedroom, sending a hurricane of cold air and sharp projectiles into the room. Lena woke up screaming. Before her eyes were even fully open, before the sound had fully registered, Dante was moving. He was a coil of pure, violent instinct. In one motion, he rolled on top of her, his body a dead weight, shielding her from the imploding glass. Shards rained down on his back. But he didn't flinch. "Stay down!" he roared, his voice a gravelly command in her ear. He covered her head with his arm as a secondary. Smaller explosion lit up the lawn, casting the room in a flickering, hellish orange. Alarms blared. Men were shouting outside. "Dante, you're hit!" she cried, feeling a warm wetness on his back, on her nightgown. "It's nothing," he gritted out, but he was pushing her, not off the bed, but down. "Crawl. To the bathroom, now. Lena." He was on his feet, naked, a terrifying silhouette against the burning wreckage of their window. He was already at the nightstand, grabbing the gun he kept there. The man she had held in the mountains, the man who had laughed in the kitchen, was gone. In his place was the Varelli boss, a man born of fire and violence, and he looked perfectly, terribly at home. In the days that followed, the man who returned to her did not fully come back. He became colder, more ruthless. He lived on the phone, his voice flat, issuing commands that left no room for interpretation. He was a general moving piece on a board, and his new, terrifying calm was more frightening than his anger. He shut down emotionally. They were still physically intimate, in the dark. He would turn to her, his touch now desperate, possessive. It was no longer the slow, tender exploration of the cabin. It was a hungry, almost violent claim, as if he could keep her safe by marking her, by reminding himself she was his. He would kiss her until her lips were bruised, his hands gripping her, his body moving with a silent, frantic energy, but he would not speak, he would not look her in the eyes. He was slipping away from her, even as he was inside her. The tension finally snapped. It was a week after the bombing, and he had been in his office for 24 straight hours. She brought him a tray of food he hadn't asked for. "Get out, Lena," he said, not looking up from a stack of papers. "You haven't eaten. I'm not hungry. Dante, look at me." He looked up, and his eyes were hollow. They were the eyes of the man at the engagement dinner, the cold, assessing stranger. "I have work to do. This doesn't work. This is you're gone," she said, her voice trembling. "You're here, but you're not. You're shutting me out. You promised honesty." "You want honesty?" he said, standing up. He stalked around the desk, his energy a physical, dangerous thing. "The Morellis are animals. They sent a message. Now I'm sending one back. That's honesty. You don't want to be in this room right now. So you're just going to what? Kill them? Kill everyone? And you're going to become this? Is this cold, empty thing?" He grabbed her, his hand clamped on her face, his fingers digging into her jaw, forcing her to look at him. "This," he hissed, his face inches from hers, "is what keeps you alive. This thing is the only reason you are still breathing." He kissed her. It was not a kiss. It was an assault. It was rough, angry, and full of the raw, untempered violence he was holding back from the world. He pressed her against the wall, his body caging hers, his mouth punishing. But she didn't fight him. She didn't cry. She just stood there, and she took it. She took his anger, his fear, his pain. Her stillness, her lack of resistance, broke the spell. He ripped himself away from her, stumbling back as if he'd been burned. He looked at his hands, then at her, his face a mask of self-loathing. "Lena, I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice ragged. He backed away, his hands up. "I'm sorry, I didn't—" He was hiding again. He was hiding behind the violence, and now he was hiding behind the apology. She walked across the room, her steps even. She took his hand. It was trembling. The hand of the man who had just dismantled a rival's operations, the hand that had held a gun, was trembling. "Don't hide from me," she said, her voice firm, quiet. "I am not a piece of glass. I am not your mother. I am not going to break." She looked him in the eye, her own gaze unwavering. "Don't you dare hide from me. I've seen worse than your anger. Your anger is just fear, and I'm not afraid of it." He didn't speak. He just brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, his eyes closing, his shoulders slumping. He was hiding, but she was holding his hand, and he was not letting go. She couldn't fight his war, but she could manage his world. While he was out, rebuilding his fortress, she took charge of his heart. She began to spend every day at the hospice with Rosa. At first, the staff was wary. She was the young, new wife. But Lena didn't come to sit and look pretty. She came to work. She read to Rosa. She learned to adjust her pillows, to manage her medication schedule. She coordinated with the doctors. She fired a nurse who was too rough and hired one who was kind. She arranged for a string quartet to play in the garden. She took charge of the hospice care with a quiet, efficient grace that no one had expected. The Varelli household, which had seen her as a child in debt, began to respect her. Marco, who now drove her to the hospice himself, would nod and say, "She's asking for you, Mrs. Varelli." The guards no longer looked at her as a liability, but as a part of the command. She was, in her own quiet way, becoming the lady of the house. But the house was unstable. The war with the Morellis was one front. The second was inside. "We have a rat," Dante said one night, rubbing his temples at the dinner table. "An informant leaking information to the FBI. What kind of information? Shipping manifests, bank codes, things that are specific, things that only someone on the inside would know." Lena's blood went cold. "Who?" "I don't know," he said, his eyes hard. "But I'm going to find out. And when I do..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Lena's mind raced. Someone on the inside. She found herself watching everyone. Was it Marco, who seemed too calm, too polite? Was it one of the new guards? Was it because she felt sick? Was it one of Rosa's nurses? Someone she had hired? She was part of his world now, and the paranoia was part of the territory. One afternoon, as she was getting ready to leave for the hospice, Dante stopped her. He was holding a small, flat box. It was covered in black velvet. "What is this?" she asked. "A contingency," he said, his expression unreadable. He pressed it into her hands. It was heavy. "Don't open it." "Not ever. Open it," he said. "When you feel the whole town watching, when you feel like they've all made up their mind about you, then you open it." "Dante, that's a riddle. I don't understand." "You will." He kissed her forehead. "Be safe. I'll see you tonight." She held the box, confused, and put it away in a drawer, the weight of it a mystery she couldn't solve. Her test came a few days later. She was leaving the hospice, walking to the car where Marco was waiting. "Lena Marlowe!" A woman's voice. A camera flash exploded in her face, blinding her. A reporter, sharp-faced and holding a microphone, pushed past a nurse. "Lena, is it true you were sold to Dante Varelli for $3 million? Are you a gold digger, or are you just brainwashed? Are you a prisoner? Lena, is he hurting you?" The questions hit her, one after another, like slaps. She was stunned, hurt and angry. She backed away, her hands up. The old Lena, the girl from Briar Hill, wanted to run, to cry. She began to walk away, her face burning with shame. "Yeah, run," the reporter shouted, "just like your father." Lena stopped. She turned around, slowly. The camera was still flashing. The reporter had a smug, hungry look. Lena walked back, right up to the woman, until she was so close the camera couldn't focus. Her voice was low, and it did not shake. "My father," she said, "is a coward. My husband," and she stressed the word, "is a man of his word. He gave me a life I never dreamed of, and I am not his prisoner. He saved my life." She leaned in, her eyes ice. "What have you done lately?" Marco opened the car door, his face impassive, but she caught the barest hint of a smile on his scarred cheek. She got in, and they drove away, leaving the stunned reporter on the sidewalk. That night, the call came. It was from the hospice. Rosa had passed, peacefully, in her sleep. Dante took the call, said, "Thank you," and hung up. He didn't move for a full minute. Then he walked past Lena, out of the room. She let him go. She knew he needed to grieve, but she didn't know where he had gone. The house was silent. She found him, hours later, in the one place she hadn't thought to look, Rosa's room at the hospice. It was empty, stripped of the flowers and the machines. It was just a bed and a nightstand. Dante was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, in the dark. He was holding a small, old, black and white photograph. Lena knelt in front of him. He didn't seem to notice. She looked at the picture. It was him and Rosa, as children. He couldn't have been older than 7. She was maybe 10. They were smiling, gaps in their teeth. They looked happy, innocent. He was crying. There were no sobs, no sounds, just silent. Steady tears tracing paths down his cheeks, dripping onto his shirt, the great untouchable. Cold Dante Varelli was sitting on the floor, broken. She didn't speak. She didn't offer platitudes. She just sat down next to him, slid her arm around his waist, and rested her head on his shoulder. She held him. She held him all night as he silently cried, as the grief he had held back for a lifetime finally poured out of him. She was his anchor. She was his shelter, and he just held on. The tension in the city had reached a boiling point. The Morellis were crippled but desperate. The FBI was circling. And then Dante's enemies found a new, sharper knife. They were in the den, in a rare moment of peace. When Dante's private line rang, he picked it up. "Varelli." Lena watched his face. She saw him go still. She saw the blood drain from his cheeks, saw his knuckles go white on the receiver. The man who had been weeping on the floor was gone, and the general was back. But this time it was different. This was not cold anger. It was white-hot, pure black rage. "Where?" he said. his voice a low, guttural growl that was barely human. "If you've touched him, if you have—" He listened, then slammed the phone down so hard it cracked the base. "Dante, what is it? What's wrong?" "They have him," he said, his voice choked. "They have who? Who?" He turned to her, his eyes black with a fury she had never seen. "The Morellis. They have your father." Tension spiked. He was a caged animal. He was pacing, roaring into the phone, calling Marco, calling his men. "I want them all. I want their houses, their businesses. I want them erased." He was going to kill everyone. He was going to burn the city to the ground to get her father back. Her father who had sold her. Her father who he despised. "Dante," she said, running to him, grabbing his arm. "Don't," he snapped, shaking her off. "Dante, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. She was not crying for her father. She was crying for Dante, for his soul. "Don't do this. Don't kill them, not for him. Don't become the thing they think you are. Please." He stopped pacing. He looked at her, his chest heaving, the war raging in his eyes. He was torn between the man he was and the man he wanted to be for her. "Please," she whispered, touching his face. "Mercy." He closed his eyes, his entire body rigid with the effort of holding back. He put his hand over hers. "For you," he said, his voice a raw, broken promise. "I'll show mercy. Once." Dante's promise of mercy was a brutal, staggering transaction. It was not a war of bullets. It was a war of assets. He did not kill the Morellis. He bled them dry, and in return, they handed over a broken, terrified Carl Marlowe. The cost was in the tens of millions. It cost him key territory, shipping routes he had controlled for a decade, and 2 properties that were vital to his operations. He had shown mercy, and it had cost him a piece of his empire. The reunion was not tearful. Marco drove Carl to the mansion, a place Carl had never been invited to, and left him in the grand foyer. He was thinner, his face a roadmap of new, terrified lines, but his eyes were still the same, weak, shifty, and looking for someone to blame. "Lena," he said, his voice a pathetic croak. He tried to hug her. Lena stood still, her arms at her sides. She felt nothing, not pity, not anger, just a cold, flat emptiness. "Look at this place," Carl said, his gaze darting to the marble and the art. "Look what he's done! He's saved your life! Dad, save me!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "He's the one who put me in danger. This animal, he's the one who started this war. He dragged us into this. He used you. Lena, he bought you like a thing. And now he's got you trapped here, a prisoner in this palace." Dante was standing in the doorway, silent. He was not there to defend himself, and he was just watching, giving Lena the space to make her own choice. Carl saw him and visibly shrank, but his resentment was stronger than his fear. "He'll get you killed," he hissed at Lena as if Dante couldn't hear. "You need to leave. Come with me. We can go to the police. We can—" "Stop." Lena's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room, silencing her father's frantic whispers. "Just stop." She turned, not to Dante, but to her father, the man who had sold her, the man who was, even now, trying to use her as a shield, as a key, as anything but a daughter. "You," she said, her voice finally finding its steel, "are the one who sold me. He," she motioned to Dante, "is the one who gave me a choice." Carl stared, confused. "What choice? He's a monster." "He's the only one who gave me the power to walk away," Lena said, her words clear and ringing in the marble hall. "And yet I stayed." She held her father's gaze. "You never sold me. Dante," she said, her voice softening as she finally turned to him. "He did." She walked past her father, past the man who was now a ghost in her life, and took Dante's hand. "Carl, you need to leave. Marco will arrange for a bus ticket, somewhere far away. Do not come back." The defeat in her father's eyes was absolute. He had no power here. He was nothing. He was, finally, gone. That night, the house was silent, but it was a new, settled silence. The war was over. The past was, for the most part, buried. Lena was in their bedroom when she remembered the velvet box. She retrieved it from the back of her closet drawer. It was heavy, She sat on the bed, her heart a strange, fluttering rhythm. "Dante," she called. He came in from the bathroom, toweling his hair. He saw the box and went still. "I guess the whole town was watching," he said, a small, knowing look in his eyes. "The reporter," Lena said, understanding. "She took the test. You passed." Her fingers trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside, resting on dark blue satin, was not jewelry. It was a stack of papers, bound in a leather folio, a deed. She read the document, her mind struggling to catch up. It was the deed to the Briar Hill Community Hospital, the failing, run-down hospital where her mother had given birth to her. Or rather, it had been the new name. In bold, formal type, read, the Rosa Varelli Center for Women's Health. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. He had bought a hospital. He had named it after his sister. But there was more. A second, smaller document, a charter for a new addition, a wing that was already funded and under construction. The Lena Marlowe wing for second chances. She looked up at him, her eyes blind with tears. "For single mothers?" she whispered. He nodded, sitting on the bed beside her, his hand finding hers. "For women who need to escape, for girls who need a different start, a place where their fathers can't sell them." "Dante," she wept, the tears now flowing freely. It was too much. It was the most profound, most thoughtful, most him gift. It was not a bribe. It was a purpose. The media exploded. The reporter who had cornered her was suddenly writing fawning articles about the mysterious, philanthropic Mrs. Varelli. The town, which had whispered about her as a gold digger, a child bride, was silenced. She went to the site, and neighbors, people who had once looked through her, came up to her. They thanked her. They told her stories about the old hospital. They treated her with respect. She realized what he had done. Open it when you feel the whole town watching. He had given her a shield. He had given her a voice. He had taken her perceived weakness, her nothing status, and turned it into her greatest strength. He hadn't just silenced the town. He had made them listen to her. That night, she lit candles in their bedroom. She put the deed on the dresser, a monument. When he came in, she was waiting. "Thank you," she said, "is not a big enough word." "I don't need a word," he said, his voice low. He stood in front of her, his hands at his sides, as if he was afraid to touch her, afraid to break this perfect, fragile peace. "I love you," she said. The words were simple, and they were the truest thing she had ever said. "I love you, Dante. I was a prisoner, and then I was a wife, and now I am just yours. By choice." He closed his eyes, a pained, beautiful expression on his face. He pulled her to him, his arms wrapping around her waist, burying his face in her hair. "Lena," he breathed. He pulled back, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "You," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard, "were never the gift. You weren't in debt. You weren't the deal." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "You were the reason I gave one." He kissed her, and it was a kiss of utter, profound peace. It was a kiss of arrival. They had, against all odds, found their home. The peace lasted for 3 days, 3 perfect, quiet days. They were in the den, sharing a bottle of wine, laughing about a nurse at the hospice who had tried to set Marco up with her daughter, when the doors burst open. "FBI! Hands in the air! Hands where I can see them!" The house flooded with men in dark blue tactical gear. Red and blue lights flashed through the shattered peace of their home. Dante was on his feet in an instant, pushing Lena behind him. "What is this?" he roared. "Dante Varelli," an agent in a suit said. "You're under arrest." "On what charge?" Dante said, his eyes scanning the room, cold and assessing. Already a general again. "Conspiracy, racketeering, wire fraud." The agent listed. "You have no proof." Dante sneered. "Oh, but we do," a voice said. A man stepped out from behind the agents. He was wearing a wire, his scar a livid white against his pale face. "Hello, boss," said Marco DeSantis. The betrayal was a physical blow. Lena felt the air leave her lungs. Dante's face was not angry. It was not a shock. It was a deep, profound, and terrible hurt. His brother, his right hand. "Marco," Dante whispered, and the name was a curse. "It was always me. Marco said, his voice void of emotion. "For 10 years. For my father, the one your father put in the ground. It's over. Dante." Agents were moving in, their guns raised, hands behind your back. "Now!" Dante was cornered. His gaze flickered to Lena. He saw the agents between them. He saw the back door. But there was no way. Lena, who had been frozen in terror, moved. It was pure, unadulterated instinct. "Dante!" she shrieked. A high, terrified sound. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She threw herself, not at the agents, but at an antique, priceless vase on a pedestal by the door. She shoved it with all her strength. It crashed to the marble floor, exploding in 1,000 pieces. "No!" she screamed, dissolving into what looked like a fit of pure, hysterical panic. Get out of my house! He didn't do anything!" The agents turned, their focus, for a split second, was on the hysterical wife. 2 agents moved to grab her. "Ma'am, calm down." It was all he needed. Dante looked at her. His eyes, for a split second, were not the boss's, but the man's. They were full of love and gratitude and a terrible, agonizing apology. And then he was gone. He moved like a shadow, through the kitchen, out the back, disappearing into the night as the agents were still trying to untangle Lena, who was now weeping and clinging to an agent's arm. "He's gone," she sobbed. She had just lied to a dozen federal agents. She had aided and abetted a fugitive. She had risked her entire life, her freedom, for him. And she would do it again. They didn't make it far. He couldn't leave the city. He doubled back for her, grabbing her from the house just before dawn, and they ran. They ended up at a run-down motel on the far side of the city, a place with a flickering neon sign and a smell of bleach and old cigarettes. The room was tiny, the brown carpet stained, the single bed covered in a worn, cheap blanket. The adrenaline wore off, and reality crashed in. They were fugitives. He had lost everything. Marco, his brother, had betrayed him. "You should have let them take me," he said, his voice dead. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the peeling paint. "No," Lena said, bolting the flimsy chain on the door. "Lena, you committed a federal crime. For me. You could go to prison." "Then we'll go together," she said, turning to him. She was disheveled, her silk pajamas torn, her hair a mess. He looked at her, and his mask finally broke. The pain, the betrayal, the fear, it was all there. He pulled her to him, his arms like steel bands, his face buried in her neck. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be," she said, her own tears starting. "We're alive." For how long? They knew this was it, this one night, and this was their last. The fear, the desperation, the certain end was all in the small, dirty room. He kissed her, and it was not like the cabin or the mansion. It was a kiss of pure, raw, human desperation. I was hungry. It was emotional. It was a last night on earth kiss. His hands were in her hair, gripping her, as if she were the only real thing in the world. Her hands clawed at his shirt, pulling him closer, closer, trying to erase the space. The world, the FBI, the betrayal. They made love on the lumpy, cheap bed, the neon sign casting a sickly red glow over their bodies. It was not slow, it was not tender. It was a frantic, desperate, and deeply emotional collision. It was full of unspoken fears and whispered promises. It was the sound of his ragged breath, the taste of her tears, the promise of "I will find you" whispered against his skin. It was the defiant, beautiful, and tragic end of their chapter. As the sun began to stream through the dirty curtains, casting gray light on the room, the exhaustion set in. He was holding her, their limbs tangled. "I have to go back," he said, his voice flat. "No," she begged, clinging to him. We'll go to Canada, to anywhere." "And be what?" he said, stroking her hair. "Fugitives? For the rest of our lives? I won't do that to you. I won't make you the girl in the motel room for the next 50 years. He sat up, and his eyes were clear. The boss was back, but he was a different boss. "Marco thinks he won, but he's a fool. He leaked, but I have more. I have other families. I have the politicians they own. I have the city's corruption. What are you saying? I'm turning myself in, he said. But I'm not going empty-handed. I'm going with leverage. I'm going to make a deal. Not for my freedom, but for my sentence. I'll help them clean up the city. The whole city. In exchange for a reduction. Dante, they'll kill you. They'll try, he said, a grim smile. But I am very, very hard to kill. The last time she saw him as a free man, it was in a gray, sterile visiting room. The bulletproof glass was thick, cold between them. He wore an orange jumpsuit, his hair was shorter, and he looked tired, but he was alive. She picked up the phone. He picked up his, "You're a fool," she said, her voice catching. "I've been called worse," he said, his small smile not quite reaching his eyes. They said it could be 10 years. "I'll do it in 5, he said. The tears she had been holding back finally fell. She pressed her hand to the glass, her palm flat against his image. "Don't," he said, his voice strained. "Don't cry. You're Mrs. Varelli. You own a hospital. I don't care about the hospital," she wept. "I do. That's all I have to give you." He slowly, agonizingly raised his own hand, pressing his palm flat against the glass, mirroring hers. They were touching, but they were a universe apart. "I'll wait," she said, her voice a raw, fierce promise. "I don't care what the world says. I don't care what they call you. I'll wait, even if the world doesn't. 6 months, a half of a year, an eternity." In the 6 months since Dante had walked into a federal building, his hands offered for cuffs, the world had changed, and Lena, who had promised to wait, had changed with it. She lived alone in the glass fortress on the cliff. At first, the silence was a roaring, agonizing thing. The absence of him was a physical presence, a cold spot in the bed, an empty chair at the vast, lonely table. The guards were gone, dismissed by the federal government, who now owned Dante's assets, but they had not seized the house. It was, as Dante's lawyers had swiftly proven, in her name, one of the many things he had done, silently, to protect her. She was no longer a prisoner, but in the first few weeks she had been a ghost. She wandered the halls, her hand trailing on the cold marble, expecting to see him, to hear his low voice. But the world does not wait for grief. The world moves on. And Lena had a hospital to run. The Rosa Lena Virelli Center for Second Chances became her armor. She poured every ounce of her fear, her loneliness, and her fierce, stubborn love into its foundation. She was at the construction site every day, a slim figure in jeans and a hard hat, pointing, asking questions, making decisions. She was no longer the girl who was bought. She was the woman who was building. The press, of course, was relentless. They saw a story, the tragic, beautiful, abandoned wife of the fallen kingpin. They camped outside her gates. They shouted questions. "Lena, did you know he was a criminal? Are you standing by him? How does it feel to be alone in that big house?" She refused all interviews. She issued one, simple, written statement. "My husband made a choice to protect our city. I am making a choice to continue the work he and his sister believed in. Now please, let me do it." The town, which had once whispered, began to admire. They saw her, not at fancy parties, but at city council meetings, arguing for zoning permits. They saw her at the diner, drinking coffee, her plans spread out on the table. She was not the Mafia wife. She was Lena Varelli, and she was, quietly, earning their respect. The past, however, did not stay buried long. With Dante's power in a vacuum, the city's underworld was in chaos. The other families, the ones he hadn't dismantled, were scrambling for territory. A new rival, a small-time family called the Falcones, saw an opportunity. They saw a woman alone in a very large house with a very large, unprotected bank account. It started subtly. A car, parked across the street, is always there. A man, accidentally bumping into her at the grocery store. Then, the message. It was not as crude as the Morelli's animal. It was a single, dead, black rose, left on the windshield of her car. The old Lena would have cried. The old Lena would have hidden, would have called Marco, who was now in witness protection, or Dante, who was unreachable. The new Lena misses. Varelli went home and made a call, not to the police, to the bank. 2 days later, she met Angelo Falcone. He was young, arrogant, and thought he was the new king. He had agreed to the meeting at a neutral, public restaurant, amused. "Mrs. Varelli," he said, smiling, "a predator. A pleasure. I was so sorry to hear about your husband. Such a loss." "Mr. Falcone," Lena said, stirring her iced tea. She did not look afraid. She looked bored. "Let me save us both some time. I am not a player. I am not in your world. I am running a hospital. And a fine hospital it is," he said, his smile widening. "It must be expensive." "It is," Lena agreed, "which is why I find threats to my people inconvenient. They disrupt my fundraising." She slid a file across the table. It was not thick. Angelo's smile faltered. He opened it. Inside were 2 photographs, one of his daughters, on her school playground, the other of his elderly mother, leaving a doctor's office. His face went white. Lena interrupted, her voice as cold and clear as ice. "Am not my husband. I do not have soldiers. I do not have guns. I do not have shipping routes." She leaned in, her eyes flat and hard, Dante's eyes. "I have money, a lot of it, more than you can possibly imagine. And I have just established a $10 million anonymous grant for any investigative journalist who can find a link between your waste management business and the city's new drug problem. I'm sure someone will find it." She stood up, leaving her tea untouched. "You are a rival family," she said, her voice quiet. "I am a hospital administrator. You have nothing I want, but if you ever come near me, my house, or my hospital again, I will burn your name from this city. I will do it with a pen, not a bullet, and it will be so quiet, you will not even hear me coming. Do we have an understanding?" Angelo Falcone, the new king, just nodded, his hands shaking. She walked out of the restaurant, her head high. She did not look back. She got into her car, drove to the cliffs by the mansion, and promptly threw up in the bushes, her body shaking with adrenaline. She was not him, but she had learned his lessons. She had handled it with calm, terrible resolve. She had survived. Dante was released 5 years early. He had kept his promise. He had handed the federal government the keys to the city's corruption, dismantling a system that had stood for 50 years. His leverage had been a bomb, and in exchange for detonating it, the new government program for dismantling organized crime had cut his sentence. No one knew he was being released, not the press, not the remaining families, not even Lena. It was dawn. She was awake, as she always was, her body still on a lonely schedule. She was in the kitchen, making coffee, watching the sun paint the ocean in shades of lavender and gray. She heard a sound, not a knock, a presence. The house felt different. She turned. A man was standing in the foyer, just standing. He was silhouetted against the morning light. Lena's mug slipped from her hand, shattering on the marble floor, the coffee spreading like a dark stain. "You're going to make me clean that up, aren't you?" he said. His voice. It was the same low rumble, but it was rougher, rustier. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. She was frozen. He stepped into the light. It was Dante, but it was not. He was thinner. The sharp edges of his face carved even sharper. There was a new, silvery scar that ran from his temple, disappearing into his hairline. And when he walked toward her, he had a limp, a slight but permanent, drag of his left leg. He had paid a price. He was scared. He was imperfect. He was still hers. He stopped 10 feet away from her. He looked tired. He looked broken, and he looked home. He stood there, his hands in the pockets of his cheap, government-issued pants, waiting. The spell broke. A sob, a sound from the deepest part of her soul, tore from her throat. "Dante!" She didn't walk. She ran. She flew across the marble floor, ignoring the shattered ceramic, and threw herself into his arms. He caught her, his arms wrapping around her like steel. The sound he made, a low, guttural groan of pure, agonizing relief, was the sound of a man who had finally, after a lifetime, come home. She was crying, her face buried in his chest, her hands clinging to his shirt, her entire body shaking. "You're real," She wept. "You're real. You're here. I'm here," he whispered, his own voice thick, his face buried in her hair. He was holding her so tightly. She felt his scars, his ribs, his very heartbeat, as if trying to merge them into one person. "I'm here, Lena. I'm not leaving." They stood in the foyer for a long time, just holding on, the sun rising around them, a new day dawning on their shattered, rebuilt world. Later, after the tears, after she had cleaned the small cuts on his back from the shattered glass, after he had just sat on the couch and stared at the ocean for an hour, just breathing in the air of his home, he pulled something from his pocket. It was not a velvet box. It was a small, worn, cloth pouch. "I couldn't get much in there," he said, his voice rough. He had been a worker in the prison machine shop, but I had a friend, owed me a favor. He poured the contents into his palm. It was a ring. It was not a large, gaudy diamond. It was a simple, thin band of what looked like platinum, hammered and imperfect. It was clearly, beautifully, handmade. He didn't kneel. He just sat beside her on the couch, his leg, his bad one, stretched out. He took her left hand, the one that still, stubbornly, wore the massive ring from their wedding. He slipped that one off, his expression unreadable, and tossed it on the coffee table. It landed with a heavy, expensive thud. Then he took the new ring, the imperfect, scarred, beautiful ring. "This one's not forced," he whispered, his dark eyes, the ones she had missed every single day, locking with hers. "This one's not a deal. It's not a debt." He slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "This one," he said, his voice thick, "is yours, if you still want it." She didn't answer with words. She surged forward and kissed him, a kiss that was not about desperation or fear or loneliness. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated choice. It was a kiss of peace. "I want it," she breathed against his lips. "I've always wanted it." That night, the mansion was quiet. No guards, no family, no ghosts, just them. He was in the den, and he put on a record, an old, soft, vinyl record, music, slow and quiet, filled the empty hall. Lena came out of the bedroom, barefoot, wearing one of his old, soft t-shirts. He was standing in the middle of the hall, the one where her father had blamed him, where the FBI had stormed in. He held out his hand. "May I have this dance? Mrs. Varelli?" he asked, a small, real smile playing on his lips. She took his hand. "You may, Mr. Varelli." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist, her head resting on his chest. Right over his heart, they slow danced, barefoot in the empty hall. She could feel his limp as they moved, a slight, uneven rhythm. And it was the most beautiful dance she had ever had. They were both scarred, they were both survivors, and they were, finally, free. They danced for a long time, the music a soft whisper. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "You silenced a town," he whispered, his voice full of a quiet awe. "I heard, even in there, what you did. To the Falcones, to the hospital. You silenced the whole damn town." He pulled back, his dark eyes full of a love so profound it made her ache. "But you," he said, his voice breaking, "you saved me." The final shot was not of the mansion. It was in the hospital. Months later, the sun was shining. Lena Varelli was walking through the new maternity wing. It was bright, full of new life, new mothers. She stopped by a large, gleaming plaque on the wall. It read, "The Rosalina Varelli Center for Second Chances." She smiled, a soft, secret smile. She was glowing. As she turned, her hand came up to rest, gently, protectively, on her stomach, a small but undeniable. Curve was visible beneath her dress. She had been forced into a marriage, but she had stayed by choice. And now, she was building the life she had chosen. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Lena and Dante. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comments below. We invite you to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of loyalty, danger, and passion. And please, share your thoughts in English. We read every comment and love hearing from you.